get going. So my name is John Krupsak. I'm a member of the Community College STEM network. I'm currently a professor of engineering at Hope College, and I was formerly a program officer at the National Science Foundation and a co-lead of the STEM program, the sponsor of the current CCSN. So welcome everyone. And today we're looking forward to a very engaging research to practice clinic on the overall topic of sense of belonging research and strategies. So I'm the moderator today, but most of the heavy lifting is going to be done by Elizabeth Meza and her team. So I'll pass the mic over to Elizabeth and let her introduce herself and her team members and take it away.
Well, thanks, John, and thanks everybody for being here. I'm Elizabeth Meza. I'm at the University of Washington, and I'm a co-PI on the Community College STEM Network grant. And I've been working for several years with Renuka Prabhakar at Everett Community College. And Renuka, I'll go ahead and let you introduce yourself.
Hi there, I'm Renuka Prabhakar. I'm the Executive Dean of Professional Technical Education and Applied Sciences at Everett Community College in Washington State, and I'm also the PI on an STEM Track 2 grant that started in 2021, right in the pandemic, and will conclude in, I think, July of 2027. I looked it up, Elizabeth. It's
Okay, good. We were wondering about the date the other day, but good. I'm glad we got that cleared up.
It's a 72-month. So
Wonderful.
yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna try and have as much discussion as possible, but I'm gonna start us off with just a little introduction here. Yeah, there we go. Are we on? Can you see my second slide?
No.
Does my slide
No.
show? Oh, there we go. Did that work?
Nope.
Nope.
Huh. Something just happened.
Sometimes if you stop and come back in, it works. If you like go out of
Oh my gosh.
presentation mode.
Yeah, if you go into share, you'll see like probably.
Let me just stop sharing for a moment.
There you go.
And now see if so resume slideshow. Oh my gosh, I knew this.
Do you want me to try?
Yeah, do you have it up, Renuka? I'm sorry. I don't know why this is giving me some issues right now.
Sure, let me see if I can do that. Oh, that's not the right one.
It's a Murphy's Law, as they say.
Okay, slideshow.
I'll stop. I'll try. Okay, I was trying to still to do something, but I'll stop.
Hang on a second. I have too many tabs, but I think
I know.
share.
Sorry for our technical difficulties, everyone. I was just saying the other day I had a different technical difficulty during webinar where my computer just stopped working.
No, it's not going to do it for me either. So something has changed.
Something's wrong.
You could just share it from the Google Slides page.
Okay. Let me just see if I can.
Yeah. Or I could do that if that's helpful.
Let me just see if I can try it one more time, and then if that doesn't work, why don't you get the Google slide show up while I'm trying to do it just one more time? Oh, you got it there.
Yeah, so it's just the Google.
Awesome.
Yeah,
thank you, Renuka. I didn't have that tab open.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, cool. We're on track again. So the Community College STEM Network, if you don't know, is one of the hubs. So several years ago, NSF decided to start funding hubs to bring together particular topic areas and research around those topic areas. And ours is about community college STEM decision making in particular. And we connect and support researchers and practitioners to translate research on how students navigate STEM pathways. And we're led by Michelle Van Noy. She's the PI at Rutgers. And we've also got Will Tyson at the University of South Florida. I'm at the University of Washington, and Dave Brown is at the Foundation for California Community Colleges. So those are our main partners, but we have a lot of other people who we're working with, including Renuka, Deborah Bragg. I see Shantae on the call. Shantae is one of our newest fellows that we've just engaged. So lots of people involved in the network. I think we can do the next slide, Renuka.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yep.
So why sense of belonging? Well, I recently did a systematic literature review of all the literature on community college STEM programs with my colleague Maria Espino. And what Maria and I found was that sense of belonging emerged as one of the themes in that systematic literature review. It also emerged as a theme in the case study of Everett. So we're doing a case study with Renuka and her program up at Everett Community College, and sense of belonging kind of emerged, and we'll talk more about that as a theme in their program. And then some of you might have attended the STEM Leaders and PI conference in Chicago back in November. And we did a session there. We had probably about 20, I would say, PIs or co-PIs attend our session, and we put these big Post-it notes around the room. And Renuka, can you go to the next slide and I'll show. So one of the questions that we asked during that session was, well, what are some of the effective strategies that you're using in your STEM program? And you'll see that sense of belonging doesn't appear here on the list. But what does appear are a lot of things that are where sense of belonging is kind of the underpinning that the faculty members were using as like why this was an effective strategy or practice. So for example, mentoring with prior community college students, faculty mentoring, community building, that's pretty close to sense of belonging. So we had a kind of a rich discussion during that STEM PI meeting, and sense of belonging definitely came up as like a theoretical underpinning of a lot of these activities. So today, I'd like to just kind of break for a moment and have you all kind of introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about what your role is with STEM and why you're interested in attending. And then Renuka and I will pick it back up again. And then at the end, we'll have more of a discussion. So I'm just going to start calling people who appear first on my screen. And Raphael is the first one who I see up there. So Raphael, could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your role in STEM and why you were interested in attending?
Thank you, Dr. Meza. I am Rafael Alvarez, and I shared when I first joined this meeting. I recently retired after 30 years at San Diego City College, but the majority of that, I was the founding director of the San Diego City College Meza program, which stands for Mathematics, Engineering, Science Achievement. So many of you might be familiar with that. So that's the connection to STEM, not connected to STEM, but sense of belonging, Meza, learning communities, absolutely. I mean, and then I will preface it and say, from my work, we don't get the sense of belonging unless we have validation of students. So, and we don't get the Tinto's, high expectations and student engagement unless we have sense of belonging. And so there's a logic there. So validation of students leads to facilitates sense of belonging, facilitates high expectations and student engagement. And that's just from my work in the Meza program. Thank you.
How about Anne? Anne, I see you next on my screen. Can you go?
Sure. I'm Ann Murkowski. I'm faculty at North Seattle College, and I've managed two STEM programs. I don't have one currently, but I do have an IUS focused on improving retention in some of our students from historically marginalized populations, and sense of belonging is a big part of our hypothesis on how we're going to be able to move that needle. So I'm pleased to be here and excited to be learning from you all in this lovely review. Thank you so much for all that work.
Okay, somebody can just jump in. I don't need to call on everybody.
I will. How about Gary? Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes, my name's Gary Chin. I'm with Franklin Cummings Tech in Boston, Massachusetts, and some of my colleagues are here as well. We are primarily a tech and trade college. We're a private nonprofit that offers certificates, associate's degrees, and bachelor's degrees in computer information technology, cybersecurity, the trades, biotechnology. And in my role, I support students across early college, dual enrollment, re-entry populations. as well as continuing education and workforce programs. So that's why I'm here. We really want to ensure that all of our students feel a sense of belonging and community, regardless of the modality they're engaged with their college.
Sophia?
Yeah, I can go after Gary. Hi, I'm Sophia Ryan. I'm also from Franklin Cummings Tech. In my role, I work as an academic advisor for our engineering and our construction management students here at FC Tech. I also am the coordinator for CARES, which is our behavior and intervention team. That's just seeking to support students through robust resources. And I am the key coordinator for our student life and student organizations on campus. So a lot of my role has to do with ensuring students feel like they belong here at the school, feeling like they have that sense of community, that sense of support, so that they can be successful inside of class while still managing all of their responsibilities outside of school.
Thank you. Sally, do you want to go next?
I'll go. I currently work at Gildamus College down in Huntington Beach, California. I think I actually just connected with Raphael on LinkedIn the other day. I'm a Mesa program director, creating a new Mesa program here at our campus. I previously worked at Kenyatta College in the Bay Area, and I was the primary retention specialist on the NSF STEF grant up there. It was my favorite program I've ever worked on. So there are a lot of elements from that program that I'm trying to build into our Mesa program here. And then I'm also working with our HSI STEM grant and other STEM folks around campus to see if we can pursue an NSF grant of any kind. And I try to hop into all of these CCSN webinars whenever I can.
Great. Monica, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, I'm Monica Mobley. I'm the Dean for STEM at Arkansas State University, Newport, and I'm really here. We applied for an STEM grant for the first time this year. We did not get it, but I'm very interested in STEM possibilities, and I'm also really interested in this particularly sense of belonging research. I'm kind of like Sally. I jump in on these whenever I can because I find seeing what other community colleges are doing to be extremely helpful in, my own thoughts about how to improve our programs. Specifically, for my PhD work, I studied self-efficacy. And so sense of belonging is kind of one of those sorts of parameters that also we know influences student engagement with campus and campus activities to a great deal. So I'm really interested to hear kind of the outcomes of your research and what you see working at your institutions, because I think that there's going to be a lot of shared information that will be helpful to us just to improving our campus processes.
Thank you. Anne, do you want to go next? Anne? Oh, there we
Oh,
go.
I already, Anne, I called on Anne early.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I already said hi, no worries. I'm happy to do it again, but it's not that
Okay,
interesting.
How about Meredith?
Okay.
Meredith put a note in the
Oh,
chat.
sorry,
She's
I
not
didn't,
feeling
I'm
well.
not checking the chat here. Okay. How about,
Yeah, sorry about that. I'm just not feeling so great, but I
oh,
didn't
no
want to miss
problem.
this.
Sure, absolutely. How about, Shantae?
Hey everyone, I'm Shantae Thrill. I'm a professor at App State. I'm also a new fellow with the network, and really my research just kind of looks at Black students and community colleges within STEM and STEM programs, and looking at how we support them in developing and seeing themselves as owners of STEM. So I'm just here to learn more in this role as a fellow, and I appreciate being in the space with you all.
And then I've got Justin.
Hi everyone, my name is Justin Vinton. I'm a faculty research associate at the EERC where Michelle is, so I work with Michelle frequently. I'm new to STEM. I have some familiarity with it, but I've done a lot of other NSF research, like a project on hidden innovations infrastructure. So I'm excited to hear more about what you guys are learning.
Thanks, welcome. Will?
Will, I
Will,
think
you're
muted.
off. You're muted still.
My name is Will Tyson. I'm a professor of sociology at the University of South Florida, and I'm a co-PI on CCSN.
Great. And then I think I see Melissa, who's also a part of our team's kind of our communications person. Melissa, do you want to say hi?
Yeah, sure. Hi, it is great to be here. I actually just put Elizabeth's paper on the sense of belonging into the chat. It went live today on the website. So if anyone wants to check it out, it is up there and I'm excited to be here.
Thanks for doing that, Melissa. And Daniel is our evaluator. If you're an STEM program, you know that you have to have an evaluator. And so Daniel has been our evaluator and he's been great. And Daniel, I do think I have the survey in the last, but if you wanted to drop the survey and the link at the end, that would be fine too. Thanks very much for being here. Okay, I think we're ready. We can move on and I'll just talk quickly through some of the research. So first of all, it's important to define sense of belonging. And there are a couple different definitions out there, but the one that is most often used, at least in community college context, is Strayhorn's sense of belonging. So students perceived social support on campus, a feeling or sensation of connectedness, and the experience of mattering or feeling cared about, accepted, respected, valued by, and important to the campus community or others on campus, such as faculty, staff, and peers. So I think that really speaks back to Raphael's validation perspective that he offered. It really is about feeling part of the community and feeling validated as being part of the community. And I think Raphael also mentioned Tinto, and really sense of belonging and some of the sense of belonging research is rooted originally in Tinto's theories. But community college scholars, and we can move on to the next slide, Renuka. Community college scholars have sort of said, well, that maybe doesn't fit as well with community colleges, and we need to expand this definition a little bit more. So community college scholars have expanded and adopted some additional kind of ways of thinking about sense of belonging, informed a lot by practitioners. So the first one is classroom-centered belonging. And if you're interested in kind of reading a little bit more about these, that is I did write a literature brief that Melissa mentioned. And so these are kind of further defined in that literature brief. I'm just going to go through them quickly. But classroom-centered belonging is really the observation that community college students spend most of their time on campus, not, doing maybe sports or hanging out in the student life center, but really in the classroom. And so it's important to create that socioeconomic integration within the classroom. And that's primarily the place where students might feel belonging. Disciplinary belonging, y'all might be familiar with STEM identity. And that's really kind of what we're talking about here in disciplinary belonging. So the feeling like you belong within as an engineer, as a mathematician, as a computer scientist. Practical belonging is really feeling like I can practically be here. I really have the support to actually succeed at this college through advising, through financial support. That's really big in the STEM program. A lot of the students that I've spoken to feel like the STEM program is really what helps me really actually practically be at college and belong here, because without that financial support and some of the advising support that they receive, they wouldn't necessarily be able to remain at college. Transfer-oriented belonging, that's really a lot of work by Julie Wang, if you know her from the University of Wisconsin. She really talked about, well, it's important for community college students to feel like they belong at the community college, but also to feel like they know where they're going once they transfer, and they feel like a sense of belonging at that transfer institution, and that transition between the community college and the transfer institution is a nice handoff where they can feel the belonging continue to remain in college. And then cultural belonging, you might know some of the work of Yoso, who talks about community cultural wealth and cultural assets and framing students, community college students, for their assets rather than their deficits. And so that cultural belonging is important in her work. So that was a very quick run through, but hopefully gave you a sense of kind of all of the different components of belonging that researchers and practitioners have talked about. That's just a picture of the sense of belonging brief that goes into this in a little bit more detail, and that Melissa dropped in the chat for you earlier. And then on the side there, also in that brief, is some of the evidence that sense of belonging matters and some of the research-based kind of outcomes that we have to talk about that why we think this is an important component. I won't go into it right now. I think you're all probably familiar with this, but if you need some specific references for example, your next application or for some other purpose, I do have a number of specific references in that brief. Okay, so now we're going to get into kind of what our main part of our discussion is. What are some research-based strategies for increasing belonging? So I think, oh, and this slide, it looks a little bit weird, but I apologize for that. The spacing is kind of off on this. But anyway, intentional cohorts, formal and informal peer networks. And researchers have found that both formal networks, for example, formal learning communities where you have like a specific topic and students are taking a class together and they're oriented around a particular topic, but also informal communities like just informal study groups, things that happen in the Meza Center, for example. Those things are also effective for building sense of belonging and then ultimately increasing student success. There's also classroom and climate and pedagogical approaches. So for example, active learning strategies, equity-minded teaching practices. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Perceptions of instructor support. So students who feel like their instructor supports them and cares about them report a higher sense of belonging and then higher success because of that. Culturally responsive teaching practices. And then finally, in the STEM program, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with peer and faculty mentoring. One finding that's been interesting is that when the peers or the faculty mentors or the alumni mentors are STEM professionals of the same gender and ethnicity as the students, that brings a certain cultural awareness. And they don't necessarily have to be, but the mentors should be culturally aware of the students. That increases sense of belonging for the students and then ultimately their success as well. So trying to match up students with same gender and same ethnicity mentors as much as possible seems an important tactic. These are all, again, referenced in that brief. So if you want to have some additional references, you can find them there. Okay, so any questions on any of this before we move on to our next section? I know I kind of ran through that very quickly and we will have time for discussion, but just if anybody has any questions on the research or wants to say anything about that. Okay, great. So I'm going to turn it over to Renuka now. So as we mentioned before, Renuka does have a scholars program. They call their STEM program the eSTEM. So that's why you see that up there. But Renuka, take it away and tell us about your program.
Thank you. So we call it eSTEM because our proposal was equity in science, technology, engineering, and math. That was our focus, was the equity focus. So we have a lot of different components of the program that are really challenging to kind of fit together, right? And I wish I had the quote right now, but I saw a lovely quote about how writing a grant is a glorious time because you're in a fictional world where all of this all of this works, right? And then you bring it to practice and it doesn't work as smoothly or as well as you thought it would be, and then you move forward, right? So at Everett Community College, all of our students are assigned to faculty advisors that are discipline specific generally. There's a little push and shove on that, but in our STEM grant, our eSTEM grant, what we've done is we've taken the faculty that are involved in the program and assigned all of the eSTEM students to those faculty. So they have a constant point of contact. They're talking to somebody in their discipline area. Generally for us, it's engineering and computer science and various life science transfer programs. So that's been a really big point of connection and belonging for sure. The students have developed excellent relationships with the other co-PIs in this. We're also working in conjunction with our Mesa program. So our Mesa director is also an excellent point of contact, can also provide some of the cultural belonging pieces, right? And also additional funding in some cases, field trips to Puerto Rico and all kinds of other really cool things. Almost all of our scholars are Mesa students. So in addition to the faculty mentoring, we have peer mentoring and near peer mentoring. That we did that during the first 3 years. And we found that now that we've assigned the students to faculty advisors, the mentoring isn't as big a part of this. Students aren't getting as much from that, which is interesting to me. But what we were doing is our first year scholars were teamed up with second year eSTEM students who would provide guidance and mentoring, answer questions, do all that great stuff. And then our second year scholars were assigned to folks who were already transferred out, hopefully in industry, hopefully previous students that could also provide that support. I don't think any of these things separately are groundbreaking. I think it's the package of all of them together that's made us somewhat successful in helping to foster that sense of belonging. I think one thing when we're thinking about classroom belonging, although we have 2 faculty mentors and the Mesa director, all of the students' classes won't be taught by those people, right? So I think one of the things that was unique about our STEM proposal, our submission, was that we included a section on professional development for faculty in STEM to think about culturally responsive teaching, developing a sense of belonging, and all of that. And that's actually my favorite part of this. I'm in an executive dean role, so I'm not in the classroom with these folks. Most of the ways that I interact with them is am I going to get my scholarship yet? Where's my scholarship? Am I still qualified for the program? And a lot of the technical stuff there. But I love working with the faculty to think through strategies to help them with classroom belonging. And that's been my favorite bit. In addition, we coordinate quarterly field trips and social activities. The field trips, we do one fun field trip a year, which is really just, I think we went to iFly one year. We went to laser tag, I think. We've done a couple of escape rooms. We do industry field trips, which students really get a lot of benefit out of, and we try to rotate between which ones are happening. So is it CS focused, engineering focused, or life sciences focused? And we also do field trips that are specific to our cohort, that are arranged with University of Washington, Western Washington University, and a few of the other area colleges where they have generally another group of Mesa students that are at that 4-year touring them around. And then they get some special behind the scenes lab access as well. So they usually get a lot of benefit from that. So let's see here. And sorry, Elizabeth, it's hard for me to follow someone else's bullets.
No, that's fine.
And I think the thing we've struggled with the most is delivering enhanced classroom support or academic support. We were doing that through the Mesa program, and it's one of the reasons we partnered with Mesa is because of their academic excellence workshop framework. But what we found is since we started this in the pandemic, we didn't have students coming to campus very often, and we didn't have classes on campus very often, and we've just had a really difficult transition coming out of that. And what students want is help with homework, not this kind of, the AEWs are kind of framed around exploratory questions, right? So there'd be some review questions. It'd be kind of like a recitation period at a 4-year college. And that's not really what students are finding They don't prefer that. How's that? So we tried a few different ways of going about that. And what we've landed on right now is actually funding embedded tutors in classes so that can give them that support in the classes that they're in. And we do that through the tutoring center. And we're just starting with that. So there's been some rocky road there as well. But I think those are the major pieces of our STEM grant. So we have near peer mentoring, we have faculty mentoring, we have field trips and social activities, we have academic supports, and of course we have the financial supports. And these kind of all get at the different pieces of belonging that Elizabeth was talking about earlier: the classroom, the disciplinary, the practical, the transformation, and then the cultural. One thing I also
Oh, sorry, Renuka, I don't mean to interrupt. I want to make sure that you talk about STEM 101.
I was just getting
there.
there.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yeah. So it's not part of this grant particularly, but one of the things that happened around the same time is I launched a entry point STEM class series. So there's STEM 101, which is college success in STEM. College success is required at our institution, so we made a flavor of that that's focused on STEM. And in that, what we're really trying to do is that identity building piece. So we're talking about, what does equity in STEM look like? How are people represented? Why are the people that are famous in STEM all male, for example, right? So let's come up with some other folks that have contributed to our scientific knowledge over the years. We have weekly discussion groups where we'll have presenters come in, and rather than being a presentation on, hey, we're all mechanical engineers, we're here to talk about mechanical engineering, we're framing it around a topic. Like this one's on healthcare, and we'll bring an engineer from healthcare, we'll bring a life scientist from healthcare, we might bring in a doctor, we might even bring in the business aspect of that and say, okay, all of these people are interconnected, and that's how STEM works. It's interdisciplinary, it's interconnected. It's not really individual people doing like, oh, I just work with mechanical engineers, right? So in that way, they're also understanding the value of the prerequisite classes that I'm an engineer, so I'm speaking from the engineer's lens, right? But when I was a teacher for 17 years, so many students come in and they are like, I don't know why I have to take this chemistry class. Why are there all these prerequisites, right? Like, why do I have to take technical writing? And so bringing these people together to show them all of the different skills and roles that are necessary to make a project work is really helpful to them understanding why we require all that stuff. Like, how does this all actually work? So within that, we have those panel discussions. We have discussions on just, typical college success things, like how do you take notes? How do you do these other things? I know not all of you are from community colleges. If you're coming from a four-year like I did, I taught at University of Washington before I came to Everett. I was surprised to find that those are skills that students need that might not be familiar with, right? Because I'm not the first in my family to go to college. It was understood that you'd be taking notes and you'd do a placement exam and all of these sorts of things. But yeah, we infuse lots of information there, lots of opportunities for students to talk about their own journeys, to identify others in the field that might have similarities to their own journeys, and really build that sense of belonging. Our next class after that is STEM 102, which I can't remember the title of that because it's really, really large. It's a long, long title, but equity's in there and projects are in there. And then the really unique thing about that one is it's your first STEM course, and it has no math prerequisite. We take everyone, and we co-teach it with a math, either 86 or 96, so a pre-college level math that's also paired with a math 141, which is your pre-calculus series. So students can go through this class, be integrated in a math class, and they may get placement into 141, our pre-calculus class, or they might actually place into the next class after that, depending on how their math skills develop through this process. The whole class is project-based. They're learning to use engineering machinery, tools, CAD. They're learning their first things about CAD. They're laser cutting things. They are running organic chemistry experiments. They're doing just crazy things that you wouldn't expect. And they're picking their own topics. So a lot of it has to do with, they've really picked water research, like pollutants and those sorts of things, and the effect on fisheries, microplastics and the effect on health, these sorts of things. And it's a continuation. So every quarter builds on the previous. So as they're developing their experiment, they'll find that they have to look through, like, what is the test protocol for that? Well, there isn't a test protocol for that. So based on these test protocols, let's develop one. Well, how do we capture samples? There's not actually a sampling device. So let's 3D print a sampling device and go out there. So they're designing, they're building, they're collecting data, they're refining data, they're reporting back on that data, and in our case, they're actually, I think 3 years in a row, they won our science fair. We have a science and engineering student exhibition, which is a poster session available to everyone in STEM, and 3 years in a row, they have won with no math prerequisites, no chemistry, no physics, all of that, right? So they are very much feeling like they belong in STEM. And they're very much feeling like they belong in the classroom. When they go forth into their next classrooms, they're asking folks like, why don't we do more of this? Why aren't we talking about the cultural aspects of this, right? Why aren't we doing more group work? Why are we just doing lecture, right? Why aren't we doing this in a project-based way, which I love. But they also come back to us every quarter and they're like, hey, how's the project going? What are they working on this year? So they come back to our instructors and ask those questions, which is just beautiful. They show up at our science fair the next year, even though they're not participants anymore. They're very much invested in STEM and in Everett Community College, and they very much feel like part of the community. So although it's not part of our eSTEM program, I think that's one of Everett Community College's big successes. And we did apply for an IUs for that, but we didn't get it, so we did it anyway. So I think lessons learned, yes, definitely sense of belonging is an important concept. It was emerging as the grant was being implemented. We didn't really know that there were these different facets of that, like from a research framework kind of way, but we felt it, right? Many of us were underrepresented folks in STEM when we started our careers, and we could feel those different pieces. Like, yeah, I didn't feel like I belonged in the classroom or in the discipline or, practically funding wise. Or culturally, right? I went to the University of Washington. There was no cultural belonging in mechanical engineering, and I was one of, I think, 6% women in that area, right? So there's all of these things that we lived through. So although the research wasn't there to support these different facets at the time, those are the things that we were inadvertently targeting, if that makes sense. Yeah, this requires substantial resources in terms of funding, but really even more than that, it's coordination and buy-in from both faculty and administration, right? So being at the administrative level, I can get that buy-in administratively, but how do we get faculty to understand the importance, faculty who aren't in the eSTEM program, the importance of developing the sense of belonging in our students and the tactics they can use in their classroom to make that successful, right? So that's what the professional development is targeted towards, but we have faculty are busy folks, right? So getting that buy-in is a really challenging thing, and we have some financial compensation for that, but nonetheless, it's been challenging to get that buy-in from faculty to come and participate in it. Of course, we picked the faculty in the first year that were like, yeah, these people are definitely going to participate, right? And that was very successful. But as we go through this 6-year program, it's become more and more challenging to find faculty that want to participate in this year-long professional development. And as far as that goes, in our first year, we did an intensive 2 days and expected that they would implement these practices as they move forth. And what we found was because it was an intensive 2 days before the beginning of the school year, the faculty didn't tend to, I don't know, maybe remember that as things went on. So we started making it a biweekly meeting throughout the year. And they were expected to think about like, all right, so what is it that you're going to implement this year? Let's talk through it. Let's use a rubric to grade how that might be effective, and then go implement, come back, report back on what we thought about that, how it worked, how it didn't work, and then we'll talk about how we can make some adjustments to make it work in the future. And that was really beneficial. The faculty loved that. But as I said, moving forward, now we're going into year 4. It's just finding it's increasingly difficult to find faculty in STEM that are interested in doing that work, which is disheartening to me. So faculty mentoring is definitely working. Peer community is definitely working. Financial support definitely working. And yeah, you can definitely incorporate those even in a resource limited context. The things that aren't working so well for us are the academic supports, the Meza involvement in the AEW. So again, we're trying to think about switching to embedded tutoring. Embedded tutoring has been really successful across the college. So we're just essentially funding that. We're trying to fund that. Yeah, I think I'm not nearly as clear of a speaker as Elizabeth. I apologize for that. I have my phone going off like 50 times because that's what the dean role is, right? But I think you get the idea, and I'd love to take any questions or thoughts from you because I do better at that.
One thing that I want to talk about a little bit is that we when we did talk to those PIs at the STEM conference back in November, they really talked about how STEM, it's not really that much money after you give out the scholarship dollars, right? It's not the kind of dollars that are going to allow you to reframe an entire department or really do something very major at your college. And so they really did talk about the idea of using your other resources like the Mesa Center, like other IUS grants, like other different kind of coupling together different grant programs to make the kinds of impacts that they were looking for, but that takes work and coordination, and that's tough in community colleges sometimes. So, but I wanted to just point out that we know that STEM isn't necessarily going to be the silver bullet, for getting things off the ground, and there's a big concerted effort from a lot of different units on campus that are needed.
Yeah, and I think I came into this, I think, a week before they submitted. Had I been part of it from the get-go, I would have thought about this differently. I think I would have thought about the STEM 101 being the core piece there for the belonging. Because I'm finding that, right? Like the STEM 101 cohort is a really cohesive cohort. They move their classes together. They have study groups. They all coming in at the same time. But so I think I would have incorporated that more heavily than some of the other things that we're doing here. Raphael, do you have a question?
Thank you. First of all, that was excellent. And congratulations to you and your team and of course, STEM programs. You do such great work. This is, and it's all a learning experience, but,
Yeah.
and I'll just keep this brief. My message outside of this meeting or this clinic, but everywhere, it's learning culture. If we can just think about that. We all know there's a culture for learning in every institution, higher education. I was first generation, by the way. And when you're first generation, you don't know this. It's a hidden curriculum, but yet students are expected to know this. And I'm hearing what you talked about with Mesa and AEWs. I didn't implement AEWs in my program, by the way. That to me was it just took too much effort, and the returns weren't what I didn't match the effort put in. But so what I did instead was I developed a learning culture praxis model. And that culture, just to be clear, two parts. I defined it, articulated this, developed this, and it's a power model. Two parts. Having a mindset for learning. Most important part, we understand this. Having the mindset. Give me a student with a strong mindset, I'm going to show you a successful student. Think about that. And just a key point there is careful when the students, when they're in the dark, I call it turning on the lights, but when they're in the dark, and careful what environments they're coming from and what habits are being enabled. Careful if the students are self-sabotaging. Self-sabotaging, it's simply because they don't know what that is really and how important those choices are. So when they self-sabotage, what we do in Mesa, what you do in STEM, what's done in higher ed, it really doesn't matter because they're choosing to fail. So think about that, having a mindset for learning. And there's language there that's very powerful. The second part, 10%. So having a mindset's 90. 10% is knowing how to effectively approach the learning. By the time they get to the homework, if that's where they're having difficulty, it's likely too late because they needed to know how. They were expected to come prepared to class. They don't even know how to come prepared to class.
That's right.
And then the learning in the classroom, that has to be at a high level so that they review lecture notes immediately after class, immediately, to get the big picture and work on big picture level. Now we work on homework. And I want to just sum it all up. So that's learning culture, having a mindset for learning and knowing how to approach the learning. But I want to sum it all up because I was invited to present at the University of St. Thomas in Houston, and I was happy to do that. Presented to students, presented to faculty and staff. And I said, I'm there all day. Use me. I want to meet with your leadership, and I did, but use me. And you have my schedule. They had me scheduled 30-minute blocks to meet with groups 2, 3 of students on academic probation. So there we are. Here's our challenge. You have 30 minutes to transform a student's life who's on academic probation. The answer is I did just that with every one of them. And I'm putting a link that's a product of my work. It's called a handout. It's called a message from the corner man. That's my work that I use to transform their lives, turn on the lights and empower them with the learning culture. But I'm bringing this to this conversation for this reason. And so I invite you, we could talk offline, Renuka, and anyone else that might be interested. But when I transformed their lives and turned on the lights, made it clear, we're meeting because you're having academic challenges, right? Right. I can tell you that's not you. I know you have great potential. You have many strengths and great potential. You're just in the dark when it comes to this thing called learning culture. Turn on the lights, and I finish, and I ask the students, how does this make you feel? How do you feel now that you know there's a learning culture, there's resources, there's training videos, it's free. Here, you have it. Now you go in the classroom and you're in the light of the learning culture. A young man said to me, Latino said, first time I've ever heard this. Many said, this gives me hope. I feel empowered. I'm motivated. Absolutely. I'm looking for that. I'm hoping for that. The kid said, I feel safer. Safer? Tell me more. What do you mean, safer? I didn't understand what he was referring to, and we talked about it. I feel a greater sense of belonging.
That's right.
That was incredible. So I share the link, anything there, and you'll see it's on the Turning on the Lights website also. But anything there, I hope it's helpful to you because you're doing such great work, Renuka. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I did want to say, although we're not using that language, learning culture, I think STEM 101 and particularly STEM 102 is really directed about that. And part of it is modeling it, right? So our engineering instructor is one of our engineering instructors is typically teaching that class. We trade off between one engineering instructor and one chemistry instructor, but we're teaching math and engineering and chemistry in the class, right? So Matthew, our engineering instructor, is often saying, like, I don't know. Let's go research that together. I'm not a chemist. Let's go figure it out. Let's go visit the chemistry lab and see if we have the equipment to do that. Like, okay, we don't. How are we going to work around that? What else can we do? So they're learning that learning culture is part of our instructors too, right? So we're modeling that in a way. And we're also, we're creating, we're breaking down that power dynamic, right? Like we aren't held up on this pedestal. We also don't know things, right? We also mess things up. We also want to learn, right? So all of that is really great. Yeah, so I mean, I think that's really the big success of STEM 102. We went from like having a hard time filling 8 seats in that class a couple years ago, and I guaranteed that I would run it even if it was losing money for a little while because I was like, it's gonna work. And now we have 23 people every quarter, when we offer it, which is great. And it really is about the learning culture and bringing in their own cultural dynamics and identity into it, right? Because we're doing water modeling and all of that, but we're like, okay, how does that we live, every community college is really near a lot of tribal land, right? So how does microplastics in the water affect indigenous folks and their fishing rights and like all of these other cultural pieces come into that? So they're learning that it's interdisciplinary. They're learning that this little piece that you're doing, which is sampling water, is actually affecting a lot of cultural things as well, right? In the community. And they're thinking about, when I go out into a job, there are many more layers to this than I thought, right? But more than anything, it is really about learning culture. I don't think anybody walks out of that going, trust me, I'm an engineer. I hate trust me, I'm an engineer. So I don't think anybody I don't think anybody walks out of that class thinking that. I think
There's a
it's more
question in the
like,
chat
okay,
about the content of the faculty professional development.
the content, yeah. Did you have specific questions about that or?
It's from Meredith, who's
Thank you. This is all amazing, by the way. I'm so inspired.
Well, thank you. 'Cause I'm feeling pretty disorganized, so I appreciate that.
You say that, but I think it's just not coming across. I'll tell you the truth.
Sometimes my
What's
passion
coming
and
across is how
disorganization.
awesome this is.
That's great.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering how do you structure that professional development time with faculty? How do you introduce the ideas of creating a sense of belonging in the classroom and get them hooked, and then that practice over the course of the year? It was really helpful to hear that the 2-day intensive isn't useful, that it's much better to do it over. But yeah, if you could say some more about it,
Sure.
would love
I
to
mean, and we
learn
start
from
with
you.
some, like, if you talk to our equity and social justice, our DEI side of the house, like we have a division of DEI, many of them are like, oh God, you're using that stuff? That stuff is so basic from so long ago. But it's like, that's where our instructors are at. So we'll start with that. So strangely, the most impactful thing that I've seen in our STEM classrooms, which we do this there, and with our faculty, is just the simple power and privilege wheel. I don't know if you know that one. Oh, I'm gonna find it.
Sorry, this is so bad at unmuting and muting. But yeah, I
Okay.
think I have seen that
There's many,
in a
many
training a
versions.
long time ago, as you say. But
Yeah, I mean,
isn't it?
there's many
Yeah.
versions. I don't know which one we use right now. I'm gonna click on something, and we'll see what it is. But so we ask our students in STEM 101 or STEM 102, I don't remember which one, and our faculty in the professional development to think about all of these different pieces of their identity and where they land, right? So I'm a citizen, closer to power. Um, I'm BIPOC, further away from power, right? And so we actually, in our STEM 103, which is about computer science, they actually scratch it all out and then they run a program to see the area of the shaded area. And they, they determine their power and privilege based on the shaded area, if that makes sense. But they're learning to code. So I'm LGBTQIA plus, so I'm on the outside of that. I'm housed, so I'm on the inside of that. Female on the outside, right? So you look through that, and then you also think. So we have them do it from ourselves, and then we ask them to think about a student that they've had in their class who struggled, and then try to fill out not this
Mm.
particular one, but one that we find that they have an easier time filling out for a student. And yeah, it's okay if you have to guess, but think about them and how they fit with that. Where's the power, where's the privilege, right? So we do a lot of the big post-it note things like, okay, so in the classroom, think about, one of the areas that you have power and how you could leverage that to support students in your classroom, right? And some of them are easier and some of them are not as easy. A lot of people go to the academic piece and they're like, well, I have a doctorate or a master's, and so I could help them by sharing my knowledge. And I find like that's pretty weak. There's other things you can do there, right? So kind of like trying to get them in the right direction with that, and they're sharing with their peers, so they're hearing their faculty peers or their student peers share these things too, right? The faculty, we actually ask them to share a little bit. The students, we're just asking them to reflect because they should not have to share those things with the class, right? But just starting with that kind of information, getting them to think less about the subject and more about the feelings, honestly, right?
Yeah.
So with the faculty, we start with that, and we're like, okay, so if one of the identities is, where I'm able, but then I have a student who's deaf, how am I going to change? No, how does my teaching practice change? How do I include them without, like, oh, let me say that again for you, right? Not just talk louder and slower in their face, right? Like, how do I how do I help incorporate that sense of belonging? How do I not make them feel like I'm singling them out? Maybe, just having those conversations. And really, it's about the faculty feeling that they can be vulnerable in this space. And that starts with me as the facilitator by also being vulnerable in the space, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I mean, and so we also have core learning objectives, college-wide learning objectives, as I'm sure everyone does. One of them is equity and social justice based. So what we do is we create an assignment throughout the year that's focused on assessing a student's ability to distinguish between power and privilege, or a variety of other things. So they'll read a case study, whatever. I've done it in my thermodynamics class, believe it or not. Like, I found a paper on how pollution is from power generating plants is disproportionately um, it's I'm missing a word here. It's disproportionately distributed.
Negatively affecting.
Yeah, it's disproportionately distributed based on race, honestly, not just income. So there's some interesting, yeah, and I can find that paper and give it to you as well. And they're like, this is not income, this is race. It's not together. So we talk about that in thermo. We talk about, all right, so if we put in hydroelectric dams, which we're very big on in Washington, we have a lot of hydroelectric dams. How does that change fisheries, and how does that affect indigenous fishing rights, right? So we do a lot of reflection, even in a class like thermodynamics, where people would generally argue there's too much content there anyway. But I think once I started that, students were even more engaged. They saw more value in it than just equations and kind of esoteric stuff. Does that help, Meredith?
It really does. Thank you.
Yeah.
We're getting close to the end of our time, so I'd encourage anyone, if they have questions, to we'll put them in the chat or bring them up and um, ask Elizabeth to convene any final thoughts you might have, or reminding people that at the very beginning of the chat, there's a link to the detailed breakdown that Elizabeth put together with all the with a huge number of references to give you other resources.
And I just dropped my
Renuka, can
email in
you
the chat.
can you throw up the last slide for us, please?
Yeah, and I just threw up my email in the chat for anyone who wants to talk more.
Great, and also, as Elizabeth pointed out, STEM runs on evaluations. So Danielle, our evaluator, put the very brief survey link. We'd appreciate it if you could take a couple minutes to respond to that. That would help us out in making these better in the future.
Great. Well, this was a really rich discussion. We had really hoped to hear a little bit more about your STEM programs, but I'm not sure that many people have a current STEM. But I guess one thing I'd like to close with is in doing the systematic literature review and also just reviewing a lot of different STEM programs, one thing that we noticed is that there are oftentimes a lot of different activities, and this is how it started out at Everett as well. And then a theory kind of emerges from those different activities of like why students are being successful or why this program is working. But I think, if you started out with a sense of belonging or self-efficacy, someone mentioned, or STEM identity as the underlying theory, you could then choose the activities that you think are the ones that will most heavily influence that. And then that's kind of the reason why you've included all of those activities in your STEM or your IUS or whatever it is. So I really encourage everyone to kind of think about what is the theoretical underpinning of our work? What do we believe in? And kind of go from there. And I'll end with that. Renuka, any closing thoughts, or John?
No, thanks. Other than thanks for giving me the opportunity to share and chat with you all. I'd love to connect and think more about how we could partner or what we can learn from each other.
Thanks so much, Renuka. You've been great to work with all these years.
Thank you. You too.
All right, and please reach out if you anyone on the call. I'd love to talk further.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Elizabeth's really put together, quite an extensive review of the literature with a lot of resources. So as you peruse that and have questions, the CCSN is a resource. One key takeaway is, it's not one size fits all, and sometimes it seems like it's better to get started and try to figure out what works at your institution to try to move the needle on sense of belonging and iterate and get some feedback from some people who have been there before, like Renuka and some of the other STEM programs. So. Encourage you all to take a look at that resource and reach out to the network for more information, and hope to see you at our July Research Practice Clinic. We will be sending an update on that shortly.